Always good to have you with us. We continue our conversation here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary. Where are the Christians going to turn when it comes to endorsing a candidate? You know, the Christian movement in this country became very political, and that leadership was provided by Jerry Falwell, the moral majority. And this goes back decades. But they became a political force. And the Republicans love to identify themselves as Christian conservatives. There's a big facet in the party that obviously is identifiable with them. And so if Trump is their nominee and he can't step forward and say what his favorite Bible verse is, it's going to bother some very dyed-in-the-wool Christians. He says, as much as I love the art of the deal, it's not even close. We take the Bible all the way, he says on Friday on the Stump. When he was asked, as a soundbite we played on Bloomberg, with all due respect, to share his favorite verses, Trump, a Presbyterian, was not direct. So how does this play? What does it mean? And then you look at what the Republicans have done in government, going after food stamps, going after vulnerable, defunding public education. Across the board, they're picking and choosing neighborhoods. Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, they want to privatize everything. They see $1 in everything. And the Pope has brought this to the attention of the American people that selfishness is not Christianity. And for more on this, let's turn to E.J. Dionne, Washington Post columnist, senior fellow at the Brookings Institute. E.J., good to have you with us.
Ed, always a joy to talk to you. Great to be with you.
What do you make of Trump not being able to quote a single verse? My take is that this will be a signal to true Christian conservatives that this guy isn't real. What do you think?
Yeah, I think I think that Christian conservatives are, among other things, very biblically literate. They care passionately about the Bible. And I was quite surprised that he couldn't pull something out of the air. You know, many years ago, I was interviewing George W. Bush before in 1998, and he was clearly someone who was genuinely religious. And you know, when I was doing some reporting in Texas, even his harshest critics did not deny that he was the real deal when it came to being a Christian. And when I asked him this same question, he was initially very hesitant and said all of the Bible, and then eventually cited the obvious thing, which I'm surprised Trump didn't just toss out there, and say the Beatitudes or something. What I was thinking about that question, posed to Trump, he could have cited the parable of the talents, since he could say that he was the guy who took his talent and invested it pretty well. So I think for some share of the Christian conservative community, that's going to be an important thing. But they are not monolithic as voters, and Trump right now is getting his own share of the Christian conservative vote, and he
certainly is. I want to point this out. The most recent CNN ORC poll last month, who said, of course, Trump had said in an interview that he had never asked God for forgiveness, which I think is another red flag to conservative Christians, and Christians, should I say. He has 23% of the vote and is beating out former Sunday school teacher Ben Carson, former Baptist Pastor Mike Huckabee, and Ted Cruz, of course, who launched his campaign at Liberty University, the world's largest evangelical university. So among Christian conservatives, Trump still leads at 23%. But, you know, when this story gets out and gets circulated, I think that's going to be questionable.
Right, but you know what? Also, it is 23%, which means 77% of them are not for Trump at the moment. And I think what the real question on the Christian conservatives is who can unite that vote, which is, as you know, really important in Iowa. The Christian conservatives are a very large percentage of Republican caucus goers. And that's where Ted Cruz becomes really interesting, because has made a play for the Christian conservative vote right from the beginning of the campaign when he went down to Liberty University to announce his candidacy. And so I think what this does is, I'm not sure it's going to dent Trump's 23%, but I think it's really going to limit his ability to grow, which may not matter in a more secular state like New Hampshire, but will matter a great deal in Iowa. I think there's one other thing here, Ed, that that we need to face up to, which is there are a lot of times, and this is true on the left too, where people will talk about their religious conviction, but their political views are what are really driving this. And, C.S. Lewis, a great Christian writer, said a lot of people go to Scripture not to search for guidance about politics, but to find support for their own political party. And I think, unfortunately, there's an awful lot of that going on in politics and religion right now.
Can you make the case that the Republicans are not faith-connected with their ruthlessness when it comes to the budget and picking on the poor?
Well, obviously, as you know, Ed, I agree with you on the principle that if you don't care about the poor, it's really very difficult to call yourself a Christian. Jim Wallis, the great progressive evangelical leader, likes to say that if you cut all of the references Jesus made to the poor out of the Bible, you'll have a book full of holes.
Yeah.
And it's, and Pope Francis, who is coming here in a couple of weeks, has been relentless in making this point to everyone. And I think he's played a really constructive role where, in a way, what he's saying is stop having culture wars and just look at what the Scripture demands of people. What kind of behavior should we engage in as people? I think sometimes those of us on the progressive side have been reluctant to just go out there, and you've done this a lot. You did this on all your shows. Come out there and say, let's read this document whole. Let's look at the Scripture whole. And if you do, you have to come out on the side of the least among us. Now, I know some real compassionate conservatives who will make an argument that not all of this has to happen through government. And up to a point, I think that's legitimate. But there are certain things that we have to do in common if they're going to get done at all. None of us is generous enough to support health care for all the poor people in the country. And that's why we have turned to government, and that's why a lot of the support for social programs in Europe came not only from social democratic parties, but also from Christian democratic parties.
Yeah.
And so we do need a very different kind of religious conversation in the country, and I'm hoping Pope Francis will help push that along.
E.J. Dionne, always great to visit. I appreciate your time tonight. Thanks so much.
Great to be with you, Ed. Thank you so much.
E.J. Dionne, Washington Post columnist, senior fellow at Brookings Institute, with us here on Ed Schultz News and Commentary.